Birth of the list. The FBI's 10 most wanted list didn't start as some grand law enforcement strategy. In 1950, a reporter from the International News Service asked the FBI for the names of the toughest criminals they were after. The Bureau gave him a list, and when the story ran, something unexpected happened. Tips flooded in from regular people who'd seen these guys or knew something useful. The FBI realized they'd stumbled onto a publicity goldmine. By March of that year, they made it official, turning what was basically a random media request into one of the most recognizable crime-fighting tools in American history. Selection criteria. Getting onto the FBI's 10 most wanted list isn't automatic just because you've committed a serious crime. The Bureau has specific criteria they use to decide who makes the cut. First, the person needs to have a substantial criminal record, usually involving violent offenses or serious federal crimes. Second, they have to be considered particularly dangerous to the public, not just a regular fugitive. The crucial third factor is publicity. The FBI only adds someone if they believe that widespread media attention and public awareness will actually help lead to the person's capture. Without that last piece, there's no point in taking up one of those 10 valuable spots. Reward system. The FBI's reward program is pretty straightforward. They offer cash for tips that lead to arrests or convictions, and the amounts vary wildly depending on the case. For a regular fugitive, you might see $5,000 or $10,000, but for high-profile terrorists or major criminals, rewards can hit $1 million or more. The money comes from Congress through the FBI's budget, sometimes supplemented by private donations. If you give a tip, you can stay completely anonymous through their website or phone line, and if your information pans out, you work with the FBI to claim the reward later. They verify your tip first, so you only get paid if it actually helps catch someone. Capture success rate. Since 1950, the FBI's most wanted list has been remarkably effective at actually catching people. Over 94% of fugitives who've made it onto the list have eventually been located or apprehended. That's an impressive hit rate when you consider these are people actively trying to disappear. What makes this number even more interesting is how many of these captures come directly from public tips. Someone sees a face on a poster or a news segment, recognizes their neighbor or coworker, and makes a phone call. The list works because it turns millions of ordinary people into potential spotters, essentially crowdsourcing the manhunt. Longest time on list, Victor Manuel Garina held the record for the longest time on the FBI's 10 most wanted list at 32 years from 1984 to 2016. He was a security guard for Wells Fargo in Connecticut, who walked off with $7 million in cash from the depot he was supposed to be protecting. The FBI believed he fled to Cuba, where he had connections to a Puerto Rican separatist group called Los Macheteros. Cuba doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States, which means if you make it there and the government decides to shelter you, you're basically untouchable. Garina was eventually removed from the list not because they caught him, but because they needed the spot for more pressing threats. First female fugitive, Ruth Eisenman Shear, made history in December 1968 when she became the first woman ever added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. She and her boyfriend kidnapped Barbara Jane Mackle, a 20-year-old college student whose father was a wealthy real estate developer in Florida. The plan was straightforward: grab the girl, bury her alive in a homemade box with an air tube and some food, then collect a $500,000 ransom. Barbara spent 3 days underground in that box before the FBI found her. Eisenman Shear's boyfriend got caught first, and she went on the run for nearly 3 months before getting arrested in Oklahoma. She was working as a nurse's aide under a fake name when they finally tracked her down. Terror editions. After September 11th, the FBI's 10 most wanted list basically got a new job. Before 2001, you'd mostly see bank robbers, serial killers, and organized crime figures. After the attacks, terrorism took over as the top priority. Osama bin Laden was added to the list back in 1999 for the embassy bombings in Africa, but after 9/11, his profile skyrocketed, and the Bureau made hunting him and other terror suspects their main focus. The list started filling up with names connected to Al-Qaeda, bomb plots, and attacks on Americans overseas. It was a complete shift in what the FBI considered the most dangerous threats to the country. Cybercriminals. The FBI's most wanted list used to be full of bank robbers and mobsters, but these days you'll find a different kind of criminal showing up more and more: hackers. Starting around the mid 2000s, cybercriminals began appearing regularly, reflecting how crime itself has moved online. Some of these wanted hackers work alone, draining bank accounts or stealing personal data to sell on the dark web. Others run ransomware operations, locking up entire hospital systems or city governments until someone pays up. So then there are the state-sponsored ones, hackers working for countries like Russia, China, or North Korea, stealing military secrets or disrupting infrastructure. The FBI has had to completely retool how it investigates crime to keep up. Mistakes and controversies. The FBI's 10 most wanted list has had its share of screw-ups over the years. In 1968, they added a woman named Ruth Eisman Scheer for kidnapping, making her the first woman on the list, but later evidence suggested her role was exaggerated compared to her male accomplice. Some fugitives have been added for crimes that didn't really match the dangerous threat image the list was supposed to represent. White-collar criminals or nonviolent offenders mixed in with murderers and terrorists. There have also been cases where the FBI kept someone on the list way longer than made sense, long after the trail went cold or the person was likely dead. Critics argue the list sometimes serves more as a publicity tool than an actual law enforcement priority. Current 2026 list. The FBI's 10 most wanted list in 2026 looks different from past decades. You've got cartel leaders involved in mass fentanyl trafficking, a couple of cyber criminals who orchestrated ransomware attacks that shut down hospitals, and several individuals wanted for domestic terrorism. There's also a serial predator who used dating apps to target victims across state lines. What you don't see much anymore are bank robbers or mob bosses, those classic fugitive types. Modern law enforcement priorities have shifted hard toward transnational crime, cyber attacks, and organized drug trafficking. The list reflects what actually threatens people now: digital infrastructure collapse, opioid deaths, and coordinated violence that crosses borders in seconds. Public tips that worked. Sometimes the biggest breaks in manhunts come from regular people just paying attention. In 1995, Ted Kaczynski's brother recognized the Unabomber's writing style in the manifesto and turned him in after 17 years of bombings. A McDonald's employee in Pennsylvania spotted Eric Rudolph, the Olympic Park bomber, digging through a dumpster behind the store in 2003 after he'd been hiding in the Appalachian woods for 5 years. In 2013, 3 women held captive in Cleveland for a decade were freed when a neighbor heard Amanda Berry screaming and helped her break through a door. The neighbor called 911 immediately. These weren't trained investigators, just people who noticed something off and actually did something about it. International manhunts. When a fugitive boards a plane and leaves the country, the FBI doesn't just give up and close the file. They activate their network of legal attachés stationed in U.S. embassies around the world, who work directly with local police forces to track the target down. The big problem is extradition treaties, which basically dictate whether a country will send someone back or let them stay. Some nations have strong agreements with the U.S. and will cooperate quickly, while others refuse extradition entirely or drag it out for years with legal appeals. If you fled to a country without a treaty, you might think you're safe, but the FBI can still pressure that government through diplomatic channels or wait until you slip up and travel somewhere they can grab you.